After I failed the mission, I chose to return to my original world the only way I knew how, by dying. 3 peaceful years passed. Then, out of nowhere, the system contacted me again. "Host, do you remember the mission we worked on 3 years ago? We've detected a problem. Your target, she's found out the real reason behind your death. And now, she's about to turn dark. So we want to know, would you consider going back? Just wanted you to talk to her. Maybe that can get things back on track." I looked over at my wife, her smile soft, and our son, who was wobbling through the grass on unsteady toddler legs. I was torn. When the system contacted me, I was standing on an open plain, taking in the vastness of the land and the quiet beauty of the wind. Not far off, my wife knelt beside our son, encouraging him to take one more step. Tourists nearby glanced over with envy. "You've got a perfect life," one of them said. "Must feel like a dream. Degree from a top university. Mid-level executive at a Fortune 500 company. A wife with a big heart and a strong family behind her. A healthy and happy child. If the system hadn't suddenly reminded me, I might have forgotten that I once had another life." "Host, how have you been?" The voice came in hesitant and awkward, like someone unsure if they were still welcome. We were just wondering. Do you remember that mission we worked on together 3 years ago? When you chose to end the mission through death, you left a permanent mark. You became the one person your target could never forget, the one she would always love. She's been searching for the truth about your death ever since. And recently, she found something. A clue. Things are spiraling. She's not well. We're seeing signs of a breakdown. There were even moments where she tried to hurt herself. So, we're begging you. Just one more mission. 1 month. After that, we promise, no matter the outcome, we'll bring you back. We won't bother you again." I lowered my eyes, voice flat. If she's losing her mind, she should see a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. But she's like this because of you. Don't you feel the slightest bit of compassion? Daisy Phipps? Losing her mind? I let out a short, cold laugh. When I left her, it wasn't gentle. We'd torn each other apart. Even when I told her I was going to die, she didn't pause. Not for a second. I was her fool. The guy who came when called, and got tossed aside just as easily. I once walked through a thunderstorm to get her a damn pizza, just because she mentioned she wanted one. When I returned, soaking wet and shivering with cold, she was gone. She climbed into Todd Astor's limo as if she had been waiting for this moment, and walked into a fancy restaurant as if I wasn't there. I stood outside, holding that greasy pizza box like an idiot. When she finally came out and saw me, she didn't look touched, just annoyed. "Ryan? What the hell are you doing here?" She looked at the pizza in my hands and frowned in disbelief. "You really went and bought it?" "I mean, I just wanted some pizza. Not that I like pizza." She glanced back at the warm, candlelit dining room behind her. "Don't you think a place like this suits me better?" She didn't even look at me when she walked away. And now the system wants me to believe she's falling apart over me? What a joke. Maybe it was the sound of my laugh that set the system off. Its voice suddenly turned sharp, almost frantic. "Have you forgotten? The two of you have a child." My hand clenched instinctively at the memory. Back when I was still deep in that mission, Daisy Phipps was obsessed with Todd Astor. Chasing him madly. They'd grown up together. Their families had even thrown them an engagement party, picture-perfect golden couple, the kind that made people say, meant to be. And then Molly showed up. Todd fell for her hard. So hard he went to war with his own family, broke off the engagement, gave up his inheritance, and followed Molly overseas. By the time I entered the picture, Daisy had become a villain in everyone's eyes. Spiteful. Reckless. Loathed. But I didn't see her that way. I saw the cracks under the mask. I started talking to her, listening, pulling her out of the darkness piece by piece. One step at a time, she let her guard down. We moved in together. Talked about the future. Got married. Had a child, our son, Luca. Back then, I started to believe I could stay. I could leave the system, the missions, the back and forth between lives. I could just be. But then, when Luca was barely a year old, Todd Astor came back. It turns out that without money, fairy tales won't last long. Todd's family cut off contact with him after he and Molly left. Todd, who had never worked a day in his life, suddenly had no idea how to survive. The bills piled up. Reality hits. Their love story crumbled into shouting matches and slammed doors. Then one day, after a brutal fight, Todd ditched Molly and flew home. He came back on my birthday. Daisy and I had made plans, a quiet celebration at home, just the three of us. I waited from 6 o'clock until 2 in the morning. When the front door finally creaked open, Daisy walked in, smelling faintly of his cologne. I knew she'd gone to see Todd. I'd even overheard one of his calls earlier that day. "Daisy," he said, voice low and intimate, "we've known each other since we were kids. You really think I feel nothing for you?" Her eyes welled up like she'd just been handed a second chance at a fairy tale. And once again, she ran toward Todd Astor. Left me behind. Again. It wasn't the first time. Over the past 5 years, I'd lost count of how many times it had happened. Only I knew the truth, Todd was never going to leave Molly. And only I was stupid enough to keep waiting for Daisy. She paused when she saw the table, cold dishes, untouched cake, a single candle melted into a crooked lump. She didn't say much. Just gently carried Luca, who was sleeping in my arms, back into the bedroom. Then she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, Ryan. Happy birthday. I lost track of time. I'll get you a gift tomorrow, okay?" I looked at her, tired. "You don't have to," I said. "The day's over. And I don't need a gift." Back then, I was stuck in a loop. A slow, exhausting spiral. I started treating her like I did in the beginning, thoughtful, attentive, always showing up with hope in my hands. I didn't want her to crash and burn chasing something that was never real. And I didn't want to lose her either. Every day, she was with Todd, heading to the office together, staying late for business meetings that bled into the early hours. And every night, I sat in silence, pretending I didn't hear the click of her heels returning home too late. One night, I finally snapped. I shouted across the room, my voice raw with exhaustion and heartbreak. "Daisy, do you even have a heart?" She flinched, startled by the version of me she'd never seen before, angry, disheveled, stripped of pride. She stepped back, irritation flaring in her eyes. "Oh my God, Ryan. You sound like a grudge-bearing person. What's wrong with you? Don't think too much about it. Todd and I have known each other for more than 20 years, and now I'm just helping him get back into the Astor family." But not long after that conversation, she started taking Luca to see Todd. The day I truly broke was the day Todd dropped them off at the house. Luca had just started stringing words together, still clumsy, but proud of every syllable. That afternoon, he pointed at Todd and called out, "Daddy." His very first "Daddy." And it wasn't for me. It was for Todd. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching the man who'd walked back into Daisy's life steal the one title I had left. Todd had worked his way back into the Astor legacy over 3 long years, with Daisy coaching him through every step of it. And during those years, the three of them had started to look like a picture-perfect family. They celebrated holidays together. Birthdays. They exchanged gifts like any other household. And Luca, he called him Daddy Todd. He was over 4 now. And not once, had he ever looked at me and said, "Dad." Every time I tried to correct him, Daisy would shut it down. "He's just a kid, Ryan. Why are you pushing him like this?" And Luca, God, Luca, he'd double down. "I like Daddy Todd. I don't like you. I don't want you to be my dad." Then came the day Daisy announced she was taking Luca on a trip, with Todd. I made one last plea. My voice shook. My eyes burned. "Daisy, if you walk out that door, I'll die. Do you hear me? If you choose him, I won't survive it." She didn't even pause. She looked at me like I was pathetic. A manipulator. Like I was trying to guilt her into staying. "Ryan," she sighed, exasperated. "You know I never really loved you. I never really loved you." I watched Daisy's back as she walked away, my chest hollow, my heart thudding in that terrible, quiet way that only happens when you know something's truly over. Barely above a whisper, I said, "Goodbye." She heard me. I know she did, her steps faltered for a heartbeat. But she didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. She just kept walking. The system's voice broke through the silence, softer than before. "Are you really choosing to leave like this?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. If I couldn't leave a mark on her heart while I was alive, then maybe death would let me forget she was ever in mine. Please, just think about it, would you? If not for her, then for me. I gave everything to bring you back 3 years ago. The system's voice came again, quiet now, almost pleading. And for the first time, I hesitated. Back when I was young and stupid, I lived for the thrill, skydiving, cliff diving, fast cars on wet roads. And I paid for it. Nearly died for it. When I was broken and bleeding, it was the system that pulled me back from the edge. Even though I failed the mission, it showed me mercy. Gave me a second chance. Gave me life. And that second chance led me to her, the woman who cared for me through recovery, who never once looked at me like I was ruined. She was my nurse then, part of the rehab team that worked round the clock to put me back together. I still remember the day she called me a medical miracle, shaking her head like she couldn't believe I'd survived. When I told her the truth about how I came back, she didn't laugh. She didn't run. She just sat there in silence, then quietly said, "No wonder it feels like you were meant to live." And somehow, that didn't stop us from falling in love. Didn't stop us from building this life. A home. A son. And now, I was torn in half. On one side, the system that had saved my life. On the other, my wife and child, who were my life. And I didn't know which part of me I could live without. At night, my wife noticed my absent-mindedness and asked me patiently. Just waited until we were alone in the bedroom, the lights low, her hand resting gently on my arm. "What's going on?" she asked softly. I hesitated. Then, I told her everything. The system. Daisy. The child we'd left behind. The choice I didn't know how to make. "Rachel," I asked, voice thick, "what would you do?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached across the space between us and took my hand. "No matter what she's done," she said, "she's still a human being. If she's suffering, we can't just turn away." I knew then, it wasn't just her compassion as a nurse speaking. It was trust. In me. My throat tightened as I squeezed her hand back. "Aren't you afraid I won't come back?" I whispered. She tilted her head and gave me that look, the one that always broke through my doubts. "We've been through worse," she said. "And I believe in you, probably more than I believe in myself." Our son stirred in his sleep, turning over with a quiet mumble. "Daddy," he murmured. I bent down and tucked the blanket around him tighter, my chest aching. Then I turned back to Rachel and promised her, swore it like a vow. "I'll finish this. Quickly. You'll take care of him while I'm gone, just for a little while. And when I come back, I'll make it all up to you. I swear." I'd only been gone 3 years. But in the mission world, 10 years had passed. And now, 10 years older, Daisy stood in front of me with a look I'd never seen on her before, open, reverent, trembling like she was afraid I might vanish if she blinked. "Ryan," she breathed. "Is it really you?" She gently nudged the boy beside her forward. "Luca, come on. Say hi to Daddy." Luca's face flushed red as he stepped forward. He threw his arms around me with surprising strength for his size, clinging to me like he'd never let go. "Daddy." For years, I had imagined this moment. Dreamed it. Ached for it. I used to wonder what it would feel like, to finally hear him call me that. But now that he was shouting, I felt very calm. I let out a long breath. It was time to stop dancing around the truth. "Daisy," I said, meeting her eyes. "I already said goodbye to you the day you walked out of my life. I died. You saw the body yourself, didn't you?" Her face twisted, and her voice cracked as she shouted, "No. No, that wasn't you. You were always so composed, so dignified, there's no way you would die like that. Not like that." I watched her unravel right in front of me, and a sharp weight settled in my chest. She was worse off than I'd expected. Far worse. Even more broken than she'd been the day Todd left her behind. I almost regretted coming back. "I don't know how to explain this to you," I said gently. "You can think of me as resurrected, time-traveled, or soul-traveled across dimensions. But I'm only here for 1 month. That's all. I came back because I owed the system a debt. And when this is over, whether you accept it or not, I'm leaving. I won't stay. So please," I added, softer this time, "don't make this harder than it already is." But Daisy, panicked, clung to any thread she could grab. "It's okay. 1 month is fine, just stay," she said, the desperation in her voice stripping away any pretense. She led me to her current home. A sprawling mansion perched high above the coastline, sun-drenched on one side, facing the ocean on the other. Clean, modern lines. Wide open windows. Exactly the kind of house we used to talk about having. Back when, someday, still felt like a promise. She handed me a neatly folded set of clothes, her tone light, almost hopeful. Ryan. I always kept your things here. I never really believed you were gone. I held up a hand, stopping her before she could slip into more sentiment. How's Todd? She flinched. When I chose to exit that world through death, I needed it to look like an accident. Fast and irreversible. So I staged a car crash. What I didn't count on, what neither I nor the system anticipated, was that the driver would be Todd Astor himself. Todd chose to run after the accident. The system panicked. Their golden protagonist, their carefully scripted male lead, was now a hit-and-run killer. That wasn't part of the plan. So they pulled strings. The Astor family, old money with influence in every corner of the country, stepped in to cover it up. They created a scapegoat, someone to take the fall. The press ran with it. The system swept it under the rug. And for 10 years, Daisy believed the lie. Until she didn't. She dug and pushed and crossed lines no one else dared to cross. And when she finally unearthed the truth, that I'd died under Todd's wheels, she unraveled. But Todd? He cleaned up the blood, fixed the car, and went on vacation with Daisy like nothing ever happened. What kind of man does that? The system told me Daisy risked everything to find the truth. That she was nearly silenced by the Astor family for digging too deep. That she spiraled into grief, self-harm, obsession. But what did Todd lose in all of this? Daisy didn't answer right away. Of course she didn't. The system claimed she'd gone mad, but the moment she saw me, her mind was clear. They said she wanted to die, yet somehow, she never managed to. The truth? She didn't want to die. Not really. The Phipps and Astor families had been intertwined for generations, business, marriages, money. All tangled up. Daisy swore she'd never forgive Todd for what he'd done. But when the Astors handed over 3 lucrative projects as a peace offering, she forgave him. Just like that. Ryan, she said gently, you're back now. Why don't we just focus on us? Make the most of it. Live our life. I let out a cold laugh. Of course she'd say that. Someone like me, someone who was supposed to be dead, showing up in public without warning? That kind of thing causes panic. Especially for my parents. They have accepted my death, they have also adapted to life without me. I don't want to appear around them and disturb their peaceful lives that have finally settled down. I was only here for a month. They didn't need to see me. So I kept a low profile. Stayed indoors. Avoided the streets. But sometimes, late at night, Daisy would beg me to go out with her and Luca. Just a short walk. A little window shopping. And I couldn't say no. Because every time I tried, she unraveled. She'd grab at her hair, her breathing jagged, her eyes wild. You came back, didn't you? Then why are you still punishing me like this? It was the only time I saw it clearly. She wasn't insane. She was broken, numbing herself with denial, with the illusion that if she pretended hard enough, we could rewrite the past. And somehow, I let her. Maybe because I wanted to believe, too. That I could forgive her cruelty. Her cowardice. Her willingness to trade truth for comfort. So I wore a mask. Kept my distance. Always stayed a step behind as she and Luca walked ahead of me, hand in hand. But nothing in this world stays hidden for long. After a few outings, someone with a camera and too much time on their hands spotted us. Photos hit the internet like a match to dry brush. Heiress of the Phipps family spotted strolling with mystery man, smiles, flirting, and a rumored romance in bloom. And just like that, Daisy's phone exploded with calls. Among the dozens of calls flooding Daisy's phone, one name stood out. Todd. She answered with a sigh, switching to speakerphone, probably to prove she had nothing to hide. But the moment his voice came through, the tension in the room spiked. Daisy, Todd began, smooth as ever, I know you're upset about me marrying Molly. But come on, I already named Luca my godson. You know Molly's had health complications, she probably can't have kids. But if you just work with me here, Luca could still be the heir to the Astor name. There's no reason to parade around with some random guy just to get under my skin. Daisy's face went pale. She shot me a quick glance, panic flickering in her eyes. Todd, stop, she snapped, her voice trembling. I don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. And Luca will never call you Dad. Not in this lifetime. Todd's chuckle on the other end was cold. Mocking. Oh. Am I lying? Was I the one who forced you to give up on Ryan? Was I the one who tried to get rid of Luca? Ryan probably went to his grave never even knowing you were pregnant, right? Then, with a casual cruelty that made my blood run cold, he said. Hell, maybe he never knew because you didn't know who the father was either. Daisy went ghost white. Shut up, she screamed. You've always used me. Every word you ever said was manipulation. And you didn't use me right back. Todd sneered. Let's not play innocent, Daisy. You and I, we're the same kind of monster. He paused, then dropped his voice into something more dangerous. Something sharp. Break it off with that guy. Now. Or I can't promise I won't do something reckless. Another beat. Then, as if smelling the truth, he added, he's next to you, isn't he? Daisy and I locked eyes. She ended the call without another word, her fingers trembling slightly. I slipped my hand out of my pocket, where my phone had been quietly recording the entire conversation. Todd was right about one thing. I was right there the whole time. And now, I had everything I needed. The next morning, after Daisy left for work, I took Luca to school. He was 14 now. Once, I had loved him like he was my own flesh and blood. But now, the feelings were more complicated than I cared to admit. I couldn't love him the way I once did, not blindly, not completely. But I also couldn't ignore him. Pretend he didn't exist. Still, there was nothing I could promise him. No future I could offer. We reached the school entrance, and just as I was about to leave, a group of his classmates came running over. One of them shot a curious glance in my direction. That's my dad. Luca said loudly, proud, almost defiant. Technically, Daisy and Todd were both pushing 40. I was 25. The other boy raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. He stuck out his tongue. Yeah, right. That's your brother. Who are you trying to fool? I'm not lying. Luca insisted. He's my dad. I didn't say anything. Just watched as they both disappeared into the school building. Then I turned and walked away. But I didn't go home. Instead, I took a detour and bought a surveillance system. I knew Todd. I knew how his mind worked. The moment he realized I was back, really back, he wouldn't just sit quietly in the shadows. And it wouldn't take much for him to figure things out. A quick search, a few social media scraps, and he'd know I rarely left the house. He'd look at those blurry street photos and see what he wanted to see, a younger man living off Daisy. Her new lover. Her kept man. He'd take that as an invitation. The kind of invitation he couldn't resist. So before Daisy returned, I had someone come by and install the cameras, tucked neatly into the corners of the house, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I barely had time to see the workers out when the doorbell rang. Right on cue. I watched from the surveillance feed as Todd appeared at the door. At first, he kept it casual, rang the bell twice with the smug ease of someone who thought he had the upper hand. When he got no response, he frowned and pressed it a third time. By the fourth ring, his expression had shifted. He knew I was ignoring him. So he ditched the pretense. Started pounding on the door with his fist, voice rising. I know you're in there. Open the damn door. I used the moment to change into a robe, something casual but revealing. Chest bare, fresh red marks deliberately rubbed into my skin like someone had just been here, someone intimate. When I finally opened the door, Todd was mid-shout. I swear to God, I'm gonna see what kind of guy Daisy's been keeping on the side. His voice faltered when he saw me. He froze. Eyes wide. Mouth slightly open. Staring. I let the silence sit for a second, then reached out, grabbed his arm, and yanked him inside before he could bolt off camera. Mr. Astor, I said coolly, closing the door behind him, what brings you here? He stumbled backward, hitting the entryway wall, all his confidence gone. His eyes darted over my face like he was seeing a ghost. Ryan, he stammered. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead. He shook his head violently, as if trying to erase the image in front of him. No. No, you can't be Ryan. I saw him. I checked the body myself. He couldn't have survived that. His breathing turned erratic. Who the hell are you? I am Ryan. The meaning of my existence is to redeem the female villain. Step in when everyone else leaves. To help her become whole, so the hero and heroine could have their happy ending. That was my purpose. But Todd killed me. Not on purpose. But carelessly. thoughtlessly. And after that, everything shifted. He unraveled. Started lying. Manipulating. Becoming the kind of man who played both sides, who couldn't stop himself from sinking deeper into the rut. Just like now. Even faced with the impossible, even knowing I stood right in front of him, he was scared. But he wasn't sorry. He hadn't been 10 years ago, and he wasn't now. That's why I came back. Yes, I owed the system. But more than that, I needed to know, in the wake of my death, would the man who killed me ever pay for what he'd done? I smiled, stepping forward. My name is Ryan, I said clearly. Born in San Francisco. Graduated from Stanford. I'm 25 years old. With every word, the blood drained from Todd's face. Until I said my age. Then he relaxed. Chuckled. Well, he sneered. Daisy's really outdone herself. Must have taken some work to find a guy who looks that much like him. He circled me slowly, eyes narrowing, voice slick with disdain. If you weren't so damn young, I'd almost believe Ryan had clawed his way back from the grave. Is that so? I replied calmly. You sound nervous, Todd. Maybe a little too nervous about a dead man. He scoffed. And what if I am? Ryan died under my wheels 10 years ago and there's nothing you or anyone else can do to change that. He stopped short. Realizing too late what he'd just confessed. His gaze snapped back to mine. You might not be Ryan, he said carefully, voice tight, but your existence is still inconvenient. I don't like anyone touching my woman. Especially not someone like you. He stepped closer, smug again, like he had something to offer that made all of this go away. You just want money, right? I'll give you $3 million. Just walk away from Daisy. From her kid. From this whole mess. Todd's words hung in the air, smug and self-assured. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached out silently, internally, calling the system. This world's moral compass is shattered. And it hasn't collapsed yet? What's even the point of keeping it going? The system's voice came through, sheepish. The writing team is still working overtime, trying to come up with a redemption arc for the male lead. I stared at Todd, every inch of him soaked in entitlement and rot. Redemption? For this? I swallowed a laugh and turned to face him fully, my expression unreadable. Todd, I said mildly, don't you think you're spreading yourself a little thin? I mean, if I remember correctly, you just got engaged to Miss Molly last month. He didn't blink. Molly's my wife. Daisy's my woman. What's the issue? A low laugh escaped me before I could stop it. No issue at all, I said, taking the bank card from his hand. Of course there's no conflict. But walking away takes time, you understand. I'll be gone in 2 weeks. Completely off the map. You have my word. He nodded, visibly satisfied, and walked out of the house with the confidence of someone who thought he'd just bought control. I watched him leave, turning the card over between my fingers. 2 weeks. That's all I needed. Just enough time to use the money Todd so graciously handed me to build the perfect trap. Because if I relied solely on the law, he'd slip through the cracks. Men like him always did. Power, legacy, money, he'd find a way. But public opinion? Moral judgment? That's where I'd strike. I wouldn't just bring down Todd Astor. I'd make sure the world saw every ugly piece of him first. And when he finally realized the whole thing had been orchestrated from the very beginning, by me, I wondered what kind of expression he'd wear. Though I probably wouldn't get to see it. Because 2 weeks from now, I'd be gone. Just like I promised. Daisy told me she wanted to come with me. Back to San Francisco. Back to see my parents. I knew what she was trying to do. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, if she brought me into this part of my life, it would be harder for me to leave. I watched as she packed, carefully folding clothes and tucking them into a suitcase like this was just a normal family trip. Ryan, she said, her tone light but forced, I got Luca an extended break from school. Thought the three of us could use some time to relax together. She glanced up, smiling like we were something whole. I actually took Luca to see your parents last year. They really miss you. When they see you again, they're going to be so happy. I said nothing. Just stood there, watching her treat me the way I used to treat her, overthinking every gesture, hoping too hard. And for a second, I wondered. Back when I first approached Daisy, was this how she felt? Luca fluttered around the room, helping her zip up bags, bouncing with excitement. His eyes sparkled like he was about to go on the best trip of his life. I exhaled slowly and finally spoke. It's pointless, I said. I have parents in that world, too. Her hands froze over the suitcase. I won't give up my choice because of either side. And more than that. I have a wife. I have a son. I won't be moved by her or Luca. Her tears came fast, startling in their rawness. Maybe even faster than the ones she shed at my grave. No. No, Ryan, that can't be, she whispered. You loved me. You loved me too much to marry someone else. You're angry, I get it. You think I let Todd go. But I'll fix it. I'll return the projects, I'll make sure he's arrested. Just don't leave. She was spiraling, grabbing for anything that might hold me here. But the truth was, the love I had for her, the love that once ran deep enough to make me consider staying, had long since faded. Slowly fading away day by day in the elegance of being quietly loved by Rachel. And Luca, sweet, confused Luca, started crying too. Loudly. Desperately. I hate Todd. I want you. Please don't go, Dad. You're my dad. The words hit hard. But so did the memory of a smaller voice, a gentler one, whispering, Daddy, for the very first time. My other son, my real son, was just learning to speak. And he had just begun to call me Dad. I pressed a hand to my chest and exhaled slowly. At least I knew I wasn't a bastard. I wasn't cold-hearted, I felt something, but I could say, with absolute certainty, it wasn't love. Not anymore. Not even close. I didn't want Daisy back. What I wanted, was for this chapter to be over. So I could go home. To Rachel. To my son. I reached out and stopped her hand mid-pack, gently pressing down the suitcase lid. Don't go to San Francisco, I said. If you really need closure, I'll go with you, to the reunion. 3 days from now. I paused, then added, as your date. You're +1. The class reunion, she'd asked me about it a week ago. Practically begged. I rejected it without hesitation. Now, her eyes lit up like I'd just handed her something fragile and precious. Okay, she said quickly. I listened to you. The moment I agreed, I knew exactly what that event would be. A stage. Todd would be there, of course. Which meant Molly would be there too, playing the dutiful fiancé. And me? I had something to show them. Something that deserved a bigger audience. But fate has a funny way of messing with well-laid plans. It's always tomorrow or disaster, you never know which gets to you first. The next morning, Daisy made breakfast. She'd just sat down with her fork in hand when she suddenly doubled over, bolting for the trash can. She retched violently, arms trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. When it passed, she wiped her mouth and looked up at me, dazed. I was mid-bite, half a forkful of scrambled eggs still hanging there. I held up a hand. I've only been back 2 weeks, I said quickly. And I haven't touched you. She gave me a breathless, bitter laugh, half amused, half exasperated. Believe it or not, it's been a long time since I've touched anyone, she muttered. It's probably the heat, or my stomach. I've been feeling nauseous and cramping for days now. Something about her tone, or maybe it was all those nights watching Rachel hover over charts, made me tilt my head. How many times has it happened? I asked without thinking. Daisy blinked, surprised by the question. She paused, counting in her head. 5 times, maybe. Why? What are you, a doctor now? There was a teasing edge to her voice, lighter, warmer. Maybe because I'd agreed to the reunion. Maybe because, for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't treating her like a wound that never healed. But I didn't answer her joke. Because something in my gut was already turning. I picked up my phone, thumb scrolling quickly. You've been running on fumes these past few years, I said without looking up. I scheduled a checkup for you tomorrow morning. Just to be safe. I didn't lean into the worst-case scenarios. But something told me this wasn't just about the heat or a sensitive stomach. She gave me a small nod and disappeared down the hall to get ready. I cleaned up the dishes, wiped my hands, and waited on the couch as she finished putting herself together. By the time we arrived at the reunion, we were one of the last to show up. We reached the private room just as someone on the other side started talking. The door hadn't closed all the way. Voices drifted out. Heard Daisy's keeping some guy. Just some pretty boy. Good skin, decent jawline. That's about it. Please. Even if he's hot, he's no Todd. Todd's voice came next, slick, lazy, laced with mock humility. Hey now, my fiancé's in the room and you're out here making me blush. Daisy didn't wait to hear more. Her hand tightened around my arm, and without missing a beat, she pushed the door open and strode in like she owned the air. Well, she said, her voice sharp and sweet, seems I'm more popular than I thought. If anyone wants to say something about me, don't hold back. I'm all ears. The room went dead silent. And then they saw me. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped. Someone gasped, Ryan. Relax, Todd said smoothly, standing up with his wine glass raised. You're all confused. Ryan's been dead for years. He smiled, like he was about to tell a good joke at a funeral. It was a very tragic death. Maybe you don't know, but when Ryan was hit by the car, it was his face that was hit. He made a vague motion across his own features, enjoying every syllable. Body was mangled. Not much left to recognize. Then he turned to me with a performative grin and gestured as if presenting an exhibit. This guy here? Also named Ryan. Crazy coincidence. Fresh out of college, maybe a couple years in the real world. Not like the rest of us middle-aged folks. He chuckled. He's young. Wants a shortcut. Can't really blame him, right? Before I could say a word, Daisy moved first. Her hand cracked across Todd's face with a sharp, clean sound that echoed through the room. Who the hell do you think you are talking about Ryan like that? She snapped. She grabbed my arm, guiding me toward an empty seat, her body still trembling with fury. As she turned back, her glare could have scorched the walls. Watch yourself, Todd. Don't go too far. But Molly wasn't about to let her fiancé be humiliated, especially not by Daisy. Those two had never gotten along, and now that Molly had the Astor name behind her, she didn't bother hiding it anymore. Oh, so that's how it is, she said, standing. Big, bad Daisy Phipps can dish it out but can't take it? Or did someone finally hit a nerve? You're so used to bullying people, you don't even notice when someone pushes back. Back in the day, Molly would have never dared to speak to Daisy like that. But now? Now she had the protection of a Astor family. And for once, she stood tall. Daisy's reputation didn't help either. She had a history, a sharp tongue, a sharper temper, and not one of the 30 or so classmates in the room stepped in on her behalf. I glanced at her, my expression hard to read. She fidgeted, brushing her fingers through her hair awkwardly. Okay, so I've got a bit of a record. Honestly, most of the people here had probably been burned by her at some point. I don't know if Daisy's ever bullied anyone, I said calmly, but I do know the dead deserve better than to be dragged through the mud. I turned to Todd, smiling thinly. Oh, sorry, forgot you graduated early. Must have returned all that book learning to your professors by now, huh? And you described the accident scene so vividly, almost like you were there. I leaned forward just slightly. Tell me, Todd, were you the one behind the wheel? He froze. His whole posture stiffened, finger halfway raised at me, stuttering without sound. He hadn't expected this. Not from the guy who took his money and smiled politely. But that was the point. Midway through the event, Molly excused herself to the restroom. I waited a beat, then slipped out too. We passed each other in the hallway. As we crossed, I gently pressed a USB drive into her palm. My voice was quiet, casual. You'll want to check that. Privately. Preferably somewhere Todd can't follow. Inside the drive? A voice recording. A surveillance clip. And a thick stack of photos, all taken by a private investigator I'd hired with Todd's own hush money. The women in the pictures varied, brunettes, blondes, redheads. Some barely legal. Some far from it. But there's a man in every photo. It's always Todd Astor. Daisy had a little too much to drink that night. When we got home, she didn't say a word, just slipped into her room and crashed. Sometime after midnight, the knocking started. I groaned into my pillow, dragged myself upright, and opened the door. She was nearly crouched over in the hallway, pale and trembling, both hands clutched to her stomach. Her face was twisted in pain, her eyes wet and desperate. Ryan, it hurts. It hurts so bad I can't take it. I didn't ask questions. I drove her straight to the hospital. The on-call doctor didn't waste time, ran an ultrasound, then ordered a CT, then added blood work to the list. Everything was rushed. No delays. 3 hours later, Daisy was in a hospital bed hooked up to an 4. The doctor pulled me aside. His face was tight. Professional, but not cold. The results are in. Liver cancer. Looks like mid-stage, but treatable. There's still a good chance if she responds to the therapy. I turned and looked through the small window in the door. She was asleep, her face washed out under the fluorescent light, completely still. For a moment, I couldn't quite process it. She's not even 40, I said quietly. The doctor let out a tired sigh. You'd be surprised how common that is these days. Then he left. It was past 8 by the time her drip finished. The nurse gently pulled out the needle, and Daisy immediately tried to swing her legs off the bed. I have to get home. Luca's alone. I stopped her, pressing a firm hand to her shoulder. I called your mom. She's with him now. She tried again. Then I need to get to the office. I called your dad. He's helping you finish the work. That froze her. She slowly sat back down, her body slack with a mix of fear and exhaustion. So. I'm dying? Not necessarily, I said. It's mid-stage. If you take the treatment seriously, there's a real chance. But you've got to fight. She let out a dry, bitter laugh and looked away. My retribution has finally come. At first, she forced a shaky smile, trying to seem composed. But within seconds, she broke down, tears streaming down her face. Why is this happening? She cried out. I'm only in my 30s, Luca's still so young. I had no idea how to comfort her. So I just reached out and patted her shoulder. I told you, you're not dying. Not now. Wasn't she the one threatening to kill herself just 2 weeks ago, for me, no less? Turns out, people talk big about wanting to die, but when death actually shows up, no one's ready to meet it. No one can overcome fear. Ryan, she murmured, can you stay a little longer? Just, be here with me? I sighed and tilted my head back, trying to suppress the frustration bubbling up. Great. Emotional blackmail. Just what I needed. On the 5th day of Daisy's hospitalization, Todd showed up, Molly at his side. While Todd sat down to talk to Daisy, Molly leaned toward me and motioned toward the hallway. Mr. Ryan, she said softly, how much would it take, for you to destroy the negatives? I stared at her, stunned. I couldn't believe it. After everything she'd seen, the videos, the photos, the sickening proof, her first thought wasn't escape. It was cover up. You're seriously going to forgive him? She looked pale, worn down, like she hadn't slept in days. What choice do I have? She whispered. When I was overseas, I made stupid decisions. I lost 2 pregnancies. My body's a mess now. Todd's not wrong, she added, eyes dull. I probably won't ever have kids. If I walk away now, what future do I even have? What future? Any life, would be better than chaining yourself to a man like Todd. A liar. A cheat. A murderer. I closed my eyes briefly, collecting myself before I spoke. If you leave him now, maybe, he'll be generous. Maybe he'll give you enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But if you stay? I looked her dead in the eye. You'll end up with nothing. Because I'm not destroying the evidence. Not only did I refuse to destroy the evidence, I went a step further, I found Pete. The man who took the fall for Todd all those years ago and ended up in a hospital instead of a prison, thanks to some legal gymnastics. He didn't recognize me. Of course, he wouldn't. This Pete spent 3 years in prison and another 7 years in the hospital. It is unknown how long he will stay here in the future. To him, this place is worse than prison, more sterile, more controlled, more forgotten. He was desperate for someone to talk to. And with a little careful prompting on my part, he started venting. A lot. Way more than he should have. His knuckles whitened as he stared out the barred window. The Astors promised me, he said bitterly. Once I got transferred here, they'd find a way to get me out. But they lied. Of course they did. From the Astor family's perspective, a scapegoat locked away in a private facility with no visitors, no media, and no noise was far safer than a wild card walking free. If they hadn't feared him talking in prison, they probably would have let him rot there. I leaned in, voice steady. Mr. Pete, did you know that the man who caused the accident has now taken over the Astor family and is worth over 100 million? Did he ever thank you, by the way? For saving his ass? That lit a fire behind his eyes. He owes everything to me. Pete growled. Every goddamn dollar he has should be split with me. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not out of cruelty, but disbelief. The sheer absurdity of Pete's loyalty. His expectation of justice from a man like Todd. You really think you'll get justice without flipping the story? I said. Come on. I know you have something. Proof. Pete hesitated. He did have evidence. But fear had kept him quiet. He knew exactly what the Astors were capable of. He was afraid he'd be silenced before he ever got to a courtroom. I reached into my bag and slid a photo across the table toward him. He glanced at it. Then frowned. It was a photo of me. 10 years ago. You didn't recognize me, I said quietly. Of course you didn't. Because the man behind the wheel that night wasn't you. If it had been, you would have felt it. Known it. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm Ryan. The one who died in that crash. Pete came forward just 2 days before the 1-month deadline. I had already made my move, sent every audio file, every video clip I had to the Astor family's biggest rivals. I didn't need to do anything else. The internet took care of the rest. Within hours, the Astors were buried under a tidal wave of scandal. That same day, Pete sat on the courthouse steps, flanked by 8 private security guards I'd hired for him. He went live on social media, exposing everything. He played recordings of the Astor matriarch, conversations from years ago when she coordinated the cover-up. The camera caught him standing tall in front of the building, making sure the words, justice, and equality, etched into the stone above the courthouse doors were in frame. Then he looked straight into the lens. I'm going in now, he said, voice clear. The Astor families had this city in a chokehold for decades. But I still believe in the law. If all of this still isn't enough to convict that bastard for what he did, then I ask everyone watching to be my witness. He paused, then added, the Astors are Manhattan's biggest cancer. Back in the hospital, I was watching the live stream from Daisy's room. She was awake, just out of surgery and starting radiation. Pale. Exhausted. Quiet. Was that your doing? She asked, barely above a whisper. I glanced over at her. Then, after a moment, I let out a quiet laugh. No, I said. That was all him. Astor family stock plummeted overnight. The Phipps family took a hit too, collateral damage from years of shady deals and silent alliances. But Daisy, she didn't seem to care anymore. Luca came by to visit her. When he saw her frail body and the 4 drip in her arm, his eyes filled with tears. Later, as I stepped out to get some water, he grabbed the hem of my coat. Dad, can you stay? I turned, knelt down to meet him eye to eye, and spoke gently. Luca, technically speaking, we've only known each other as father and son for, 20 days. You didn't recognize me as your dad back then, and now, I can't bring myself to fully see you as my son. Because my child, I said softly, is still waiting for me at home. I didn't realize Daisy had followed us into the hallway. She had heard every word. She didn't say anything. Just offered a small, tired smile. Let's head back inside, she said. That night, Luca slept in the side room while I took the couch outside. The door to Daisy's hospital room was cracked open. Just as I was drifting off, her voice cut through the silence. You're leaving the day after tomorrow, right? I murmured a quiet, yeah. A soft sigh floated through the open doorway. Ryan, do you hate me? I sat up, letting the question hang there a moment, turning it over in my mind. Did I hate her? I should. Maybe once, I did. But now? I couldn't summon the feeling. Because I didn't love her anymore. Daisy, I said gently, your cancer's still in the middle stages. The Phipps family has the resources to get you the best care money can buy. If you cooperate with treatment, you've got a real shot. And Luca still needs you. She didn't reply. I lay back down, trying to rest, but then I heard it, soft, shaky sobs coming from her room. Ryan. I'm scared, she whispered. Can you please not leave? I closed my eyes for a moment before sitting up again, my voice calm but firm. Daisy, I saved your life once. And you saved mine. Me coming back now, it's not about revenge or guilt. It's about setting the world right again. You're scared because your life's always been smooth. You've never known what it's like to fall. But I have. I fell from a wall 30 meters high. My bones shattered on impact. Every inch of me was broken. But Rachel stayed by my side. She helped me survive that hell. And now, she's still waiting for me. She loves me. I love her. We can't be apart. The weather on the day I left was almost identical to the day I arrived. I helped Luca pack his school bag, zipped it up, and walked him to school. At the gate, he threw his arms around me and held on tight. "Don't worry, Dad," he whispered. "I'll take care of Mom." I ruffled his hair and watched as his small frame disappeared into the schoolyard. Back at the hospital, Daisy's parents had already arrived. Her mother didn't say much, just adjusted the blanket over Daisy's legs and glanced at me. "You're not stopping by San Francisco?" she asked softly. "No regrets?" I shook my head. "They have accepted my death and adjusted to life without me." Daisy pushed herself up slightly, studying my face for a long moment before forcing a smile. "Ryan," she said quietly, "just go. And be happy, okay?" "I will," I said. "You too." When I got home, I didn't even bother with a shower. I crawled straight into bed and wrapped my arms around both of them. Rachel murmured drowsily, "You're back." I squeezed her hand gently. "You're awfully calm for someone whose husband disappeared without a guarantee he'd come home." She turned toward me, kissed my nose, then my chin. "But you did come home, didn't you? I trust you." My eyes stung. A single warm lamp lit the room. One bed. 3 of us. Wrapped in each other's arms, like the world outside didn't matter.